Like Herodotus, Thucydides begins his history by introducing himself and his task. He presents the subject of the work as an epic conflict, the likes of which the world had never seen before. Quote, Thucydides, an Athenian, wrote the history of the war between the Peloponnesians and the Athenians, beginning at the moment that it broke out, and believing that it would be a great war and more worthy of relation than any that had preceded it. End quote. He hereby immediately sets up his history as a rival of Homer's account of the Trojan War and Herodotus' account of the Persian Wars. Thucydides is keen to signal right from the start the importance and gravity of the conflict that he's about to relate. With regard to his scholarly method, Thucydides is known to be a more thorough historian than Herodotus. As we've seen, Herodotus' work has a number of digressions. While some of these contain some interesting information, they detract from the main task of recounting the wars between the Greeks and the Persians. As we've also seen, Herodotus includes in his narrative a number of amusing stories and anecdotes that are not strictly speaking relevant for his history. He does not make any rigorous distinction between what is historically important and valuable and what's just an entertaining story. Moreover, Herodotus does not always follow a close chronological account of the events. With Thucydides, we enter into an entirely different world. He traces his history year for year in a strict chronological fashion. He's keen to explain how certain events led to other later ones. Some readers complain that his text is dry due to the lack of anecdotal stories, but this is also something that is accrued to his credit as a serious historian. Thucydides is explicit in his use of critical reason and in his careful use of his sources. He explains, quote, the way that most men deal with traditions, even traditions of their own country, is to receive them all alike as they are delivered without applying any critical test whatsoever, end quote. Everything should be examined critically, using the faculty of reason, and what does not seem plausible must be called into doubt and verified in some way. He points out that most people never bother to investigate the matter, but merely accept, quote, the first story that comes to hand. So the scholar, by contrast, must be more rigorous. We can see here an echo of the method of the philosopher Socrates, who refused to accept anything simply on authority. Instead, Socrates critically examines what's presented as true, even if this is an unpopular thing to do. He calls into question the knowledge of those who claim to be experts in a given area. Thucydides is thus at pains to research his study and carefully evaluate his sources. Clearly, in any account of a war, there are going to be many different versions and perspectives on the conflict. The winners will tell the story one way and the losers another. On one account, a group will be called rebels, and on another, freedom fighters. All of the Greek city-states had their own take on the war and all played a significantly different role in it. Thucydides wants to weed out the ideology and get to the truth of what really happened. He explains his procedure as follows, quote, with reference to the narrative of events, far from permitting myself to derive it from the first source that came to hand, I did not even trust my own impressions, but it rests partly on what I saw myself, partly on what others saw for me, the accuracy of the report being always tried by the most severe and detailed tests possible. Thus, Thucydides claims to take nothing at face value. Scholars have often noted that Thucydides' text is strikingly free from mentions of the gods, and it's even been argued that he was an atheist. His omission of the gods is in line with his understanding of scholarly history. His goal is to write a work of history that's free from mythological elements. In contrast to Herodotus, he does not invoke the gods as an explanatory principle. His interest is in human affairs, and the role of the gods he leaves to others to decide.